In this lecture, we're going to talk about Rickettsia, Coxiella, and Bartonella. This lecture has been broken up into 4 parts. The rickettsial organisms of clinical importance include 2 different families. One is the Rickettsiae family, and the other is the Anaplasmataceae family. There are 2 genera in the Anaplasmataceae family, and they include the organism Ehrlichia and Anaplasma. In the Ricketsiae family, there are numerous organisms. They include Rickettsiae Rickettsia, which is the causative agent of epidemic typhus. There's Rickettsia typhi, which causes endemic typhus. Rickettsiae, which causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Rickettsiae Knorrii, which causes Boutanneuse Fever. Rickettsiae, which causes Rickettsial Pox, and Rcky, which causes scrub typhus. Rcky used to actually be Rickettsia, but due to genetics and sequencing, some of these organisms, as you know, have changed names. So the Rcky, which was Rickettsia, is now Rcky. Now, these organisms, all of the organisms in this lecture, are actually categorized as gram-negative bacilli. However, they're very different than the gram-negative bacilli that we've been discussing over the last several weeks. And how these organisms are different is that they're obligate intracellular bacteria. So these organisms are actually more similar to viruses. However, they are bacteria, so it's easy to get these confused as viruses. And the reason is viruses are also obligately intracellular. So unlike the gram-negative bacilli we've been discussing thus far, none of these organisms will grow on agar media. So they won't grow in your traditional artificial media that you would use in any clinical microbiology laboratory. These organisms grow in the cytoplasm of living cells. So in order to grow the rickettsial organisms, you have to use cell culture or tissue culture or yolk sacs of embryonated eggs. And these organisms are divided into groups based on the clinical infections that they cause. So the Rickettsiae groups. You have the typhus group, which includes Rickettsiae Rickettsia and Rickettsiae typhi. There's also the spotted fever group, and the spotted fever group includes Rickettsiae Rickettsiae, Rickettsiae, and Rickettsiae Knorrii. There are also 2 other Rickettsia species, Rickettsia canadensis and Rickettsia bellii, that aren't included in either of the typhus or spotted fever groups. And then there's the Rcky organism. So how these organisms are transmitted is through a bite from an infected arthropod or insect vector. The organisms get inside the body through that bite, and they get into the vascular endothelium, and they will multiply and disseminate throughout the vascular system. So when people are infected with the rickettsial organism, usually they get symptoms that are very similar to having the flu. So they'll have a fever, headache, muscle aches, tired, not eating, and there are very characteristic rashes involved in the rickettsial infections. So rickettsial organisms are transmitted through insect vectors, and you can see that the different organisms are transmitted through different vectors. So that's very important. So you need to know which organism is transmitted by which vector. Once the organisms get into the body, they can spread through the blood, and they can cause a variety of very severe diseases that include encephalitis, pneumonitis. They all have some sort of rash involvement that is very specific for the infection, and they can cause mortality due to organ failure. We're going to start out by talking about the rickettsial organisms that are within the spotted fever group. So we have Rickettsia rickettsii, which is the most severe infection of the rickettsia, and it causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Humans are usually accidental hosts of Rickettsia rickettsii. So usually an individual will be walking through a very wooded area and will pick up a tick that happens to be infected with Rickettsia rickettsii, and then that's how an individual gets infected. So individuals are infected with Rickettsia rickettsii through a tick bite, through the saliva in the tick as the tick is taking a blood meal. And the ticks that transmit Rickettsia rickettsii are Dermacenter variabilis, and that's in the southeastern region of the United States, and Dermacenter andersoni, which is in the western part of the United States. Now, Rocky Mountain spotted fever is the most common rickettsial disease in the United States, with approximately 1,000 cases per year. Now, Rocky Mountain spotted fever can have a 3 to 6% mortality rate even when it's treated, and up to a 20% mortality rate if it's untreated. So this Rocky Mountain spotted fever can be a very severe infection. Here is a highly magnified micrograph of the American dog tick, or Dermacenter variabilis. Individuals that are infected with Rickettsia rickettsii will have an incubation period of about 7 days, and then they will have flu-like symptoms for 1 week, approximately 1 week. And those flu-like symptoms we've already mentioned: headache, muscle ache, nausea, vomiting, and a rash. Now, the rash with Rocky Mountain spotted fever begins as patches on both the ankles and the wrists, and those organisms will disseminate, and they can, we already mentioned, lead to pneumonitis, vasculitis, myocarditis, encephalitis, and numerous other types of potentially dangerous manifestations. So the rash with Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So the rashes with these organisms are very important. So we already said it'll start as patches on the ankles and the wrists. The rash will then move up the legs and the arms and then extend to the trunk of the body. And Rocky Mountain spotted fever can be diagnostic if the rash occurs on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. There are only a few organisms that will lead to a rash on the palms of the hands and soles of the feet. So for those of you that are making your own study charts, you might want to include that as one of your table items, where organisms that cause a rash on the palms of the hands and soles of the feet, because those organisms are very few. If a physician were to see an individual that had a rash on the palm of the hand and soles of the feet, there's only a few organisms that can do that. So it really narrows down the potential diagnosis. The other key feature about Rocky Mountain spotted fever is the rash is not on the individual's face. So all over the arms, legs, trunk of the body, palms of the hands, soles of the feet, but not the face. And individuals that have Rocky Mountain spotted fever can have complications such as disseminated intravascular coagulation, thrombocytopenia, encephalitis, vascular collapse, as well as organ failure. Now, the disease cycle, what happens is you have an adult tick that's infected. That adult tick will then lay eggs. There's transovarian passage of the rickettsial organism, so the eggs are infected with rickettsia. Those eggs will hatch and generate infected larvae, or immature ticks. Those larvae then need to mature, and they will take a blood meal in small wild rodents such as mice. The little larvae will then mature into nymphs, which are infected. They'll also take blood meals on more small wild rodents, mice, rats, other small and medium mammals. And then humans are accidentally infected when they come into contact with an infected adult tick that takes a blood meal. And then when an individual has an infected tick that takes a blood meal, they end up getting infected with Rickettsia rickettsii and end up with the disease Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So the picture on the left is a picture of highly magnified of a wood tick, and then on the right is a tick that is taking a blood meal that is being removed with a pair of tweezers. Here's an individual with a spotted fever, and this individual, you can see, has that rash on the palms of the hands, which is very characteristic for Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Here's another picture of an individual with Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and you can see the rash all over the extremities, and if this individual picked up their feet, you would see a rash on the soles of their feet. The next organism in the spotted fever group is Rickettsia acari, which causes the disease Rickettsial Pox. Now, unlike Rickettsia rickettsii, which is transmitted through a tick, Rickettsia acari is transmitted by the rodent mite or mouse mite. So the primary reservoir of Rickettsia acari is the house mouse, and it causes a similar disease to Rocky Mountain spotted fever, but much milder. The incubation period is about 10 days, and in this case the rash starts as a small papule, like a little tiny bump, that turns into a pustule, and then it necroses and forms that eschar, or where the tissue dies and the skin turns black at the site of the bite. In Rickettsial Pox, you will get a rash on the face, unlike Rocky Mountain spotted fever. You'll also get that rash on the trunk and the extremities, but you will not get a rash on the palms of the hands or the soles of the feet. So that's really important characteristic that differs Rocky Mountain spotted fever from Rickettsial Pox. So it's something you likely should know. Now, Rickettsial Pox usually will resolve without any treatment. Here is a drawing and an enlarged micrograph of the rodent mite. Now, another organism in the spotted fever group is Rickettsia knorrii, which causes the disease Boutanneuse fever. Boutanneuse fever is also known as Mediterranean spotted fever, Kenya tick typhus, South African tick fever, and Indian tick typhus. So Rickettsia knorrii is transmitted through a tick, and reservoirs include both ticks and dogs. Clinically, Boutanneuse fever is similar to Rocky Mountain spotted fever. There is a rash, and in Boutanneuse fever, you also will get a rash on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet, but also you will have a rash on the face, whereas Rocky Mountain spotted fever, you won't have a rash on the face. Boutanneuse fever is characterized by what's called taches noir, which are black spots that will develop at the site of infection. You get that tissue necrosis, and that tissue necrosis will then spread as the organism spreads. We're now going to move on to the second part of the lecture.